Racism often hides in plain sight, woven into the cracks of daily life. But in one struggling urban neighborhood, that quiet truth was about to ignite into undeniable action. What started as a brazen attempt by a gang to intimidate Max Simmons, a quiet, broad-shouldered black mechanic, would spark a chain of events that would unravel a dangerous criminal enterprise. None of Razor's men, fueled by hatred and arrogance, could have known that the man they underestimated was a former MMA fighter with years of experience in the cage, honed by brutal matches that had forged his resilience and sharpened his instincts. They saw his silence as weakness, his humility as submission, and his hands, scarred from years of hard labor, as incapable of striking back. But Razor and his crew were wrong. Before they realized it, their stranglehold on the neighborhood would begin to collapse. Their intimidation tactics would falter, their operations would unravel, and the mastermind pulling their strings would be dragged into the light. Mac's fight wasn't just about self-defense. It was about standing up for a community battered by fear and proving that unity and strength could triumph over hatred and oppression. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The steady hum of a pneumatic drill reverberated through the sunlit garage, blending with crackling rock tunes from a forgotten radio perched on a shelf. Marcus "Mac" Simmons leaned over the hood of a battered pickup truck, his broad hands moving deftly among the tangle of wires and bolts. Grease streaked his faded coveralls, testaments to hours of work. Yet there was calm in his every movement, a rhythm as steady as the sunlight streaming through the open garage door. This was his sanctuary, the hum of tools, the grit of effort, and the quiet triumph of fixing something broken. Outside, the bright midday sun lit up the city skyline, the sounds of traffic blending into the hum of a busy day. Mac straightened up, wiped his hands on a rag, and glanced at the clock on the wall. Almost lunchtime. He closed the truck's hood, slid his tools back into their place, and locked up the garage, leaving behind the comforting smell of oil and metal. A short walk later, Mac reached the broken tap, a dive bar nestled at the corner of a lively street. Its neon sign glowed faintly even in the daylight, the flickering letters adding to its scruffy charm. Inside, the dim lighting created a cool reprieve from the sun, while the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses set the scene. Lisa Torres, the bar's owner, greeted him from behind the counter. "Look who's here," Lisa said with a grin, drying a glass with a towel. "The champ graces us with his presence." Mac shook his head with a chuckle, walking up to the bar. "That champ title expired a long time ago, Lisa. These days, I'm just Mac the mechanic." Lisa gave him a knowing look. "You don't just stop being an MMA legend, Mac. And don't give me that mechanic stuff. You'll always be the toughest guy I know." Mac slid onto his usual stool, the leather groaning under his weight. Once a chiseled champion in the MMA circuit, Mac had retired nearly a decade ago. Injuries had forced him out, and time had added a little weight to his frame. These days, he preferred working on cars in his garage to throwing punches in the ring. "You're too kind," Mac said dryly, accepting the cold beer Lisa slid his way. "But I'm just here for your wings and some quiet." Lisa smirked. "Wings are on the way, and you know you'll always have quiet here. Unless someone starts trouble." Outside, the buzz of the street carried on, the chatter of passers-by blending with the hum of distant traffic. Across the road, a group of men lounged in the shade of a boarded-up storefront. Bald heads gleamed under the sunlight, their tattoos twisting across arms and necks like warnings. They were a familiar sight, a blight the locals had learned to avoid, not out of ignorance, but self-preservation. Johnny Razor Hart flicked his cigarette onto the cracked pavement, grinding it under his boot as his sharp eyes fixed on the bar. "Cozy little spot, ain't it?" he muttered to his crew, his tone carrying an edge that wasn't about appreciation. One of the others, a wiry man with a snake tattoo curling up his neck, smirked. "Looks quiet. Bet it doesn't get many visitors like us." Razor chuckled, his grin spreading like oil on water. "Let's change that." Inside, the bar buzzed with its usual calm. Mac sat near the counter, savoring his wings. Lisa was behind the bar, wiping down glasses and chatting with a couple of regulars. The jukebox played an old blues tune, filling the space with a lazy warmth. The door slammed open, shattering the bar's easygoing atmosphere like a thunderclap. 5 men strode in, their presence thick with menace, drawing wary glances from the regulars. At their helm was Razor, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the predatory air of someone who enjoyed the weight of silence that followed him. His gaze stopped on Mac, lingering with calculated intensity before his lips curled into a smirk. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air charged with unspoken challenge. "Well, look at this," Razor said loudly, his voice cutting through the room. "Didn't know this place came with a special attraction." Lisa straightened, her eyes narrowing as she stepped out from behind the counter. "Order something or leave. We don't tolerate trouble here." Razor smirked, ignoring her. His focus was locked on Mac. "Hey, big guy, you always eat this much? Or is this a cheat day?" Mac wiped his hands on a napkin and looked up, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp. "You'd better hope I don't decide to work this meal off." The room stilled, the tension thick as Razor's grin faded slightly. Behind Mac, a soft hum from the jukebox seemed to echo louder in the silence. Even Lisa, unshakable in her usual bravado, felt the weight of what was about to unfold. Razor leaned against a nearby table, his tattooed arms folded, his smirk radiating confidence. His gang spread out behind him, filling the cozy bar with an oppressive energy that made it feel suddenly too small. "You know," Razor began, his voice loud enough to cut through the quiet hum of conversation, "I'm starting to think this place has gotten too diverse." Mac didn't look up from his beer. He'd seen men like Razor plenty of times before. Loud, self-assured, and desperate for validation. They fed on intimidation and the fear of others. But Mac had long since stopped letting people like that get under his skin. "Don't see what that's got to do with me," Mac said evenly, taking a slow sip of his beer. Razor's smirk widened. "Oh, it's got everything to do with you, big guy. You're black, you're fat, and you're sitting here like you own the place." Lisa, standing behind the counter, straightened, her jaw tightening. She stepped forward, wiping her hands on a towel. "Take your boys and leave. Now." But Razor ignored her, his focus locked on Mac. "See, it's not about owning the place. It's about knowing where you belong. And you don't belong here." Mac placed his glass on the counter with deliberate care. He turned slightly in his seat, his expression calm but firm. "I belong where I want to be." Razor chuckled, glancing back at his crew. "You hear that? Big guy thinks he can talk back." One of the thugs, a wiry man with a shaved head and a snake tattoo curling up his neck, laughed. "Looks like he's got more to say than room for it in that gut." The room was silent now, save for the faint hum of the jukebox playing a slow blues tune in the corner. Mac shifted in his seat, finally meeting Razor's gaze with a piercing calm. "You've said your piece. Time to move along." Razor's smirk faded, replaced by a thin, hard line. "How about we move you along instead?" The tension in the broken tap was thick enough to choke on. Razor's smirk had faded into something darker, and his gang shifted behind him, their confidence bolstered by numbers. Mac remained seated, calm as a boulder in a storm. Lisa stood at the edge of the bar, her fists tightening around the towel she held, ready to intervene if necessary. Razor stepped closer, his boots echoing loudly against the wooden floor. "You see? It's not personal, big guy. It's just people like you. You don't get it, do you? You come into places like this, act like it's yours, like you belong here." Mac leaned back slightly, tilting his head. "Places like this." His voice was calm, but a sharp edge undercut the words. "Yeah," Razor said, grinning as if Mac had proved his point. "You know, bars, neighborhoods, the country. It's not for you." Lisa interjected, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. "Enough! Take your garbage ideas and get out. Now." But Razor ignored her, his focus unwavering. He gestured to Mac with a sneer. "See? I'm doing you a favor, teaching you a lesson. You people think you can come in? Take over. But not here. This is our space. Max straightened in his seat, his eyes cold and steady. Our space? You mean you and your little group of bald cheerleaders? He motioned lazily toward Razor's gang. Or are you talking about something bigger? The insult stung, but Razor forced a laugh. Funny guy, but yeah, bigger. This country was built for people like me. Our blood, our skin. You think you're entitled to walk in and take it all? Mac leaned forward, his massive frame suddenly more imposing. Take what? A bar stool? A plate of wings? His voice dropped lower, almost a growl. Or is it just the fact that I exist that gets under your skin? Razor faltered, but his gang jeered behind him, and he recovered quickly. You people don't know your place anymore. You're ruining what this country's supposed to be. Mac stood slowly, his height towering over Razor. The leather stool creaked as it shifted back. Let me guess, you think you're protecting some kind of legacy, right? Fighting for your so-called heritage. He took a step forward, and the room seemed to shrink. But tell me something. What's your legacy, exactly? Hating people who look different? Running around with your pack? Stirring up trouble? The gang bristled. One of them, a wiry man with a snake tattoo, spitting out, "Better than lying down and letting them take over." Take over what? Mac shot back, his voice sharp as steel. Last time I checked, the only thing you own is a mouth that won't stop flapping. The gang sneered, but Razor held up a hand to silence them. Look at you, he said, stepping closer, his voice quieter but more venomous. Big, fat, black. Bet you've been coasting your whole life on sympathy and handouts. Mac laughed, a low, dangerous sound. You're lucky my hands are still on this counter. But if you keep running that mouth, you'll see just how hard I've worked for everything I've got. Razor sneered. What are you gonna do? Sit on me, Mac smiled. But there was no humor in it. Not yet. First, I'll give you a chance to explain why you think you're better than me. Go on. Educate me. The gang laughed, emboldened by Razor's smirk. You think this is a joke? Razor asked, spreading his arms. This is about purity. About keeping our traditions alive. Mac's gaze sharpened. Purity? He stepped even closer, forcing Razor to tilt his head to maintain eye contact. You mean the tradition of running scared every time someone doesn't look like you? The tradition of hiding behind a gang because you're too weak to stand on your own? Razor's smirk vanished. You've got a big mouth, fat man. Mac's voice dropped to a near whisper. And you've got a small mind. The gang surged forward, emboldened by the tension. But Lisa slammed a hand on the bar. Enough! You throw the first punch, and you're done. You hear me? Razor sneered, but turned to his men, signaling them to hold back. He turned to Mac with a twisted grin. All right, big guy. We'll give you one last chance to walk out of here while you still can. Mac's shoulders squared as he stepped forward, towering over Razor. That's funny, he said softly. I was about to say the same thing to you. The silence that followed was deafening. The jukebox's blues tune, the only sound in the room. Razor's eyes darted to his crew before he snapped. Get him! The gang moved as one, and Mac's fists clenched, ready to show them just how misplaced their confidence was. The moment Razor barked the command, his gang surged forward, chairs scraping the floor, and boots pounding against the worn wooden boards. Mac had been in countless fights before, but this was different. This wasn't a cage with rules and referees. This was chaos. The first man to reach Mac, a wiry guy with a snake tattoo, lunged at him, aiming for a cheap shot to his ribs. Mac sidestepped effortlessly, his years of training turning into muscle memory. He countered with a sharp elbow to the man's jaw, sending him sprawling into a table, drinks flying. Another thug charged, brandishing a broken beer bottle. Mac ducked low, driving his shoulder into the man's stomach and slamming him against the bar. Glass shattered behind him as Lisa ducked for cover, shouting, "Don't wreck my place!" Razor circled in the background, barking orders. "Hit him! Bring him down!" Two men came at Mac simultaneously, one swinging wildly while the other tried to grab his arm. Mac blocked one punch and twisted free of the other's grip, his massive hand grabbing a nearby stool. With a quick, powerful swing, he sent one attacker crashing into a row of chairs. The other hesitated, his confidence faltering. But Mac didn't wait. A sharp kick to the chest sent him sprawling backward. As the bar erupted into chaos, Mac couldn't ignore the destruction around him. Tables overturned, chairs broken, glasses shattered. It wasn't just his fight anymore. Lisa's place, the bar that felt like home, was being torn apart. He grabbed Razor's collar mid-swing, pulling him close. "You want this fight? Take it outside," Mac growled, his voice low and dangerous. With a powerful shove, he sent Razor stumbling toward the door. "Come on!" Razor yelled to his crew, rage flaring as he stormed outside. Mac followed, his broad shoulders filling the doorway as the bar fell eerily quiet behind him. Outside, the streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. Razor's gang spread out, forming a loose circle around Mac. Razor's grin returned, more sinister now. "This ain't over, fat man. Not by a long shot." The first punch came from Mac, catching Razor's right-hand man in the temple and dropping him instantly. The gang hesitated for a moment, realizing this wasn't going to be as easy as they'd thought. Then they surged again, more coordinated this time. Mac fought smart, using his surroundings to his advantage. He ducked behind a parked car as one thug swung a metal pipe, the clang of steel against metal echoing through the street. Before the attacker could recover, Mac came around the side, grabbing his arm and twisting it until the pipe clattered to the ground. A swift knee to the gut sent the man crumpling. Another thug tried to tackle Mac from behind, wrapping his arms around his waist. For a moment, it seemed like the gang had the upper hand as two more joined in, trying to pin Mac down. Razor stepped forward, his grin widening. "What's the matter, old man? Feeling your age?" Mac grimaced, his muscles straining under the weight of his attackers. He dropped to one knee, his breathing labored. Razor laughed, stepping closer. But Mac wasn't done. He shifted his weight suddenly, using the momentum to throw off his attackers. As they stumbled back, he grabbed a trash can lid from the sidewalk and used it to deflect Razor's punch before countering with a powerful uppercut. The fight continued with a brutal rhythm, each move more desperate and calculated. Mac's endurance was tested as the gang fought relentlessly, their numbers wearing him down. A blow to his side sent him staggering, and for a moment he doubled over, clutching his ribs. Razor moved in for the kill, raising a steel baton he'd picked up from the ground. "End of the line," Razor sneered, bringing the baton down. Mac rolled to the side at the last second, grabbing Razor's arm and twisting it sharply. The baton fell to the ground, and Mac followed up with a series of rapid punches, his strength and precision turning the tide. Razor stumbled back, his nose bleeding and his confidence shattered. The remaining gang members hesitated, their earlier bravado fading as they saw Razor on the defensive. Mac stood tall despite his labored breathing, his eyes burning with determination. "You're done," he growled, his voice echoing in the tense silence. The street outside the broken tap was eerily quiet, save for the heavy breathing of the battered gang and the distant hum of traffic. Razor and his remaining crew limped away, throwing threats over their shoulders. "This ain't over," Razor spat, his voice trembling with rage. "We'll finish what we started." Mac watched the group of men walk away, his body aching, but his stance unbroken. Adrenaline still coursed through him, and he turned back toward the bar. Lisa was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She approached him, her eyes scanning him for any signs of injury. "You okay?" Her voice was soft, but tinged with frustration. Mac wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and shrugged. "I'm fine. They'll think twice before trying something like that again." Lisa glanced at the overturned tables and broken chairs, visible through the bar's open door. "Maybe, but my place is wrecked, Mac. This isn't just about you. They dragged this fight into my bar." Mac's expression tightened, guilt flashing across his face. "I didn't want it to go this way, Lisa. I tried to keep it contained, but you saw them. They weren't walking away." Lisa sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know. This place is all I've got, Mac. It's my livelihood. Now I have to figure out how to fix this mess. I'll help, Mac said firmly. I'll cover the damages. Do whatever it takes to make this right. Lisa softened slightly, her arms dropping to her sides. I know you didn't ask for this, but those guys, they're dangerous, Mac. They're not gonna let this go. Mac met her gaze, his voice steady. Neither will I. They came here looking for trouble, and they found it. If they come back, I'll be ready. Lisa shook her head. You can't take on all of them by yourself. This isn't a cage fight, Mac. There are no rules out here. Mac placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I've dealt with worse. Trust me. The night after the fight, the street outside Mac's garage felt eerily quiet. The usual hum of the neighborhood, the distant rumble of traffic, the chatter of late-night passers-by was replaced by a heavy stillness. Mac stood in the open doorway of his shop, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond the streetlights. He knew Razor's threats weren't idle, and the gang wouldn't let their defeat go unanswered. It started small. The next morning, Mac found a stack of old tires in his shop, slashed, the rubber shredded beyond use. A message was scrawled in red spray paint across the side of his garage. Know your place, old man. Mac stared at it for a long moment, his jaw tightening as he grabbed a rag and started wiping it off. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to intimidate him, but this felt different, more calculated. The next few days brought more signs. An unfamiliar sedan sat parked across the street from his shop, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. When Mac stepped out to take a closer look, the car pulled away, its engine growling like a warning. On another evening, a pair of Razor's thugs loitered near the alleyway, their silhouettes visible in the glow of a street lamp. They didn't approach, but their presence was a clear message. They were watching. One day, Lisa called Mac, her voice trembling, fear laced with anger. Mac, they're escalating. This isn't just intimidation anymore. What happened? Mac asked, his voice low but steady. They keyed my car, she said, her frustration boiling over. Not just a scratch, deep gouges, all over the hood and sides. They did it right outside the bar. Broad daylight. No one even tried to stop them. Mac's grip on the phone tightened. Did you see who it was? No, but it was Razor's guys, Lisa said. I recognize their type. Smirking, arrogant. They didn't care who saw them. They even knocked over the patio chairs on their way out, just to make a statement. Mac's jaw clenched as he listened, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. Did anyone else see it? Did anyone say anything? Some of the regulars saw, but they're scared, Mac, Lisa replied. These guys have been lurking outside the bar for days, just staring through the windows, making everyone nervous. People don't want to get involved. They're afraid of what'll happen if they do. They're trying to isolate us, Mac said, make you feel like you're alone. Well, it's working, Lisa snapped, her frustration breaking through. I can't keep living like this. Every time I leave the bar, I feel like someone's watching me. Last night, I swear I saw a car following me home. It stayed just far enough back to make me second-guess myself. Mac's stomach twisted at her words. He'd felt the same unease himself. The constant surveillance, the subtle reminders that Razor's crew was always nearby. Lisa, listen to me, he said firmly. You're not alone in this. They're pushing, but that's all it is. Pushing. They think if they scare us enough, we'll fold. Lisa's voice softened, but the fear was still there. And what happens if we don't? What if they stop pushing and start doing something worse? Mac exhaled slowly, his resolve hardening. Then we push back harder, together. Lisa was quiet for a moment, then said, Mac, they're not just after you or me. They're after all of us, the whole neighborhood. And they won't stop unless someone makes them. Then I make them stop, Mac said, his tone calm but edged with steel. They don't know it yet, but they've already lost. They picked the wrong fight. Determined to put an end to the harassment, Mac visited the local police station the next day. The precinct was a maze of worn desks and weary faces, the kind of place where paperwork piled higher than resolve. Detective Andrew Parker sat behind one of the desks, his sleeves rolled up and his eyes heavy with fatigue. Detective Parker, Mac began, his voice steady but firm. I need your help. Parker leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. Simmons, right? Heard you've been stirring up some trouble. They started it, Mac said bluntly. Razor's gang. They've been harassing the neighborhood for weeks, and now they're stalking me and my friends. This isn't just petty intimidation. It's organized. Parker rubbed his temples, letting out a heavy sigh. Look, I get it. Razor and his crew are scumbags. But unless they've done something concrete, assault, theft, something we can charge them with, there's not much I can do. They vandalized my shop, Mac countered. Threatened me, followed people home. And do you have proof of that? Parker asked, his tone tired but not unkind. Anything that'll hold up in court? Mac's jaw tightened. They're building up to something bigger. I know it, Parker shrugged. And maybe they are. But I don't have the manpower or the green light to chase down a hunch. You're asking me to take on Razor and his gang without solid evidence, and I can't stick my neck out for that. So I'm just supposed to wait until they hurt someone? Mac asked, his voice rising with frustration. I'm telling you to be smart, Parker replied. Keep your head down. Stay out of their way. They're looking for an excuse to escalate, and you don't want to give it to them. Mac stood, his fists clenched at his sides. If I handle this myself, you'd better not get in my way. Parker's expression hardened. Don't do something stupid, Simmons. You're not helping anyone if you end up in jail. As Mac left the station, his frustration boiled over. He had hoped for backup, but it was clear he was on his own. The system wasn't going to help him, and Razor knew it. That night, the gang's stalking became bolder. Mac noticed the same motorcycle following him as he walked home, the rumble of its engine trailing him like a shadow. When he stopped to confront it, the rider revved the bike and sped off, the tail lights disappearing into the darkness. Mac's unease deepened when he returned to his garage to find the back door unlocked. He stepped inside cautiously, his hand reaching for the heavy wrench he kept near the door. The garage was untouched, but the message was clear. They'd been there, testing his boundaries. As the days passed, Mac began piecing together a plan. Razor's gang was relentless, but their pattern of behavior gave him something to work with. They wanted to intimidate him into submission, but they underestimated one thing. Mac wasn't built to break. The gang's harassment continued, but Mac had begun to see patterns in their chaos. The stalking wasn't random. It was methodical. Razor's men weren't just targeting him and Lisa. They were expanding their grip on the neighborhood. Businesses were closing earlier, store owners were growing more nervous, and whispers of protection fees started circulating. One afternoon, Mac stood at the counter of a small corner store talking to the owner, Mr. Nguyen, a wiry man with years etched into his face. They came in again yesterday, Nguyen said in a low voice, glancing nervously toward the door. Told me if I didn't pay up, they'd make sure my windows wouldn't last the week. Mac frowned. How much did they ask for? $500 a week. Said it was for protection. Nguyen sighed, his shoulders slumping. Protection from who? Them? They're testing you, Mac said, his tone firm. If you pay, they'll bleed you dry. If you don't, Nguyen's gaze dropped. They'll wreck my shop. As Mac left the store, the pieces started falling into place. Razor's gang wasn't just stirring up trouble. They were systematically extorting the neighborhood. But something didn't add up. Razor didn't seem smart enough to coordinate something this organized. Someone else was pulling the strings. That evening, Mac returned to the broken tap, where Lisa was waiting with a grim expression. You're not going to like this, she said, sliding a folder across the counter. Inside were photographs and reports she'd gathered from other business owners in the area, broken windows, slashed tires, spray-painted threats. It was all there. It's not just the gang, Lisa said. It's bigger. I heard from a friend who works at City Hall. Razor's crew has ties to Deacon Development. Deacon? Mac asked, his brow furrowing. The real estate guy? Lisa nodded. Yeah. The same guy who's been snapping up properties in this neighborhood for pennies. My friend said his company's been pressuring businesses to sell using unconventional methods. Mac flipped through the reports, anger rising with every page. Unconventional methods like Sending in Razor to wreck the place? Exactly, Lisa said. Think about it. Razor scares people. They can't afford to stay. And Deacon swoops in to buy the property cheap. Then he redevelops it, turns it into high-end apartments or shopping centers, and prices out the rest of the neighborhood. Mac's jaw tightened. So Razor's just a pawn. Lisa leaned forward, her voice lowering. A dangerous pawn. But yeah, Deacon's the one pulling the strings, and he's got money, lawyers, and connections. If we're going to stop this, we need to play it smart. The next day, Mac decided to dig deeper. He drove to one of Deacon's latest construction sites, a half-finished complex surrounded by chain-link fencing. Workers bustled around, but something about the scene felt off. The trucks weren't just delivering construction materials. Some were heavily guarded, and their cargo wasn't labeled. Mac parked nearby, watching from his truck as Razor's men arrived. Their presence casual but unmistakable. They weren't there to work. They were there to oversee. Later that evening, Mac shared his suspicions with Lisa and a few trusted allies from the neighborhood, including Mr. Nguyen and a young tech repairman named Diego. Deacon's not just after the neighborhood, Mac said. He's using it. Those trucks at the construction site, they're moving something else. Something Razor's crew is guarding. Like what? Diego asked, his brow furrowed. I don't know yet, Mac admitted. But whatever it is, it's big. And it's dangerous. Lisa crossed her arms, her expression grim. If Deacon's running something illegal, we need proof. Without it, all we've got are suspicions. That's where you come in, Diego, Mac said, turning to the tech repairman. Can you get into their systems? Find out what they're moving? Diego nodded hesitantly. I can try, but if they're careful, it won't be easy. Give me a day. Diego's search yielded results faster than Mac expected. The next night, the young man arrived at the broken tap with his laptop. It's not everything, he said, setting the computer on the bar. But it's enough to prove something's off. On the screen were records of shipments tied to Deacon development, all routed through the same handful of sites Razor's crew was seen frequenting. The shipments were listed as construction materials, but the quantities didn't match the project sizes. There's no way they're using all of this for buildings, Diego said. And some of the invoices are redacted. That's not normal. Mac studied the screen, his jaw tightening. They're hiding something. Lisa glanced between them. So, what's the play? We watch, Mac said. We find out where these shipments are going and what's in them. If we can tie this to Deacon, we can take him down. The next few days were a mix of surveillance and strategy. Mac kept an eye on the construction site while Diego monitored their digital footprint. Slowly, the picture became clearer. Razor's gang wasn't just shaking down businesses. They were guarding a smuggling operation. Deacon wasn't just buying property. He was laundering money and expanding his empire. One night, as Mac stood in the shadows outside the site, watching another truck roll in, he muttered to himself, "This isn't just about the neighborhood anymore. This is a war." The neighborhood was changing, and not for the better. Razor's crew had ramped up their intimidation tactics, breaking windows, tagging buildings with warnings, and blocking entry to local businesses. Shops closed earlier, their owners casting nervous glances over their shoulders as they locked up. The once bustling streets grew quieter with each passing day, the oppressive weight of fear settling over the community like a thick fog. For the first time, Mac realized that even the strongest resolve couldn't win this fight alone. Razor's gang wasn't just testing his patience. They were threatening to dismantle the very fabric of the neighborhood. He needed allies. One evening at the broken tap, Mac stood in the center of a small gathering of business owners and neighbors. Lisa had spread the word, using her unwavering determination to bring people together, despite their fear. The bar, usually a place of chatter and laughter, was quieter than usual. The atmosphere tense, but tinged with a glimmer of hope. People shifted in their seats, their faces etched with worry. But the fact they had shown up at all spoke volumes. Mac cleared his throat, his deep voice cutting through the low murmur of the crowd. "This isn't just about me," he began, his words deliberate and steady. "Or Lisa. Or Razor's gang. This is about all of us. They're trying to take what we've built, piece by piece, and scare us into giving up. But if we stand together, they can't break us." The room fell silent as Mac's words settled over the group. A woman in the back, Mrs. Ortiz, raised her hand hesitantly. Her voice wavered as she spoke. "But what can we do, Mac? They have the numbers, the money, and they don't care about the law." Mac's gaze softened as he met her eyes, understanding the fear that had gripped so many in the room. "They rely on fear," he said firmly. "That's their weapon. If we don't give it to them, they lose their power. But we also need to be smart. This isn't a fight we win with fists. It's one we win with strategy." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, but the uncertainty still lingered in the air. People exchanged glances, searching for reassurance in one another's faces. Mac let the moment stretch, giving them time to absorb his words. He knew this wouldn't be easy, but he also knew they couldn't afford to back down. Razor's crew had underestimated the resilience of this neighborhood, and Mac was determined to prove that together they could push back. Diego chimed in, holding up his laptop, the glow from the screen casting shadows across his determined face. "We've already started gathering proof against them," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Their shipments, their connections to Deacon, it's all tied together. If we can keep building on that, we'll have what we need to take it to the police or the press." Lisa leaned against the bar, her arms crossed as she surveyed the small but determined group. Her voice carried a steady conviction. "And, in the meantime, we protect each other. If they come after one of us, we make sure they know we're all watching. They can't target everyone if we're united." The crowd murmured softly, the spark of defiance slowly catching as people exchanged glances, their fear starting to shift into something more resolute. Mac stepped forward, his broad shoulders seeming to take up the space. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the growing chatter. "I need people to help. Watch the streets, report anything suspicious, keep an eye on your neighbors, your businesses, and if you see Razor's crew, let us know. We're not fighting this alone." The room fell into a thoughtful silence, the gravity of Mac's words sinking in. The next morning, that silence gave way to action. The community began to mobilize in ways no one had expected. Small groups organized themselves, taking shifts to walk the neighborhood in pairs. They moved deliberately, their presence visible, enough to make Razor's men hesitate. Shopkeepers who once locked their doors early now stayed open a little later, the courage to resist bolstered by the knowledge that others were watching. Diego's efforts were just as critical. He worked tirelessly to set up a simple network, connecting key people through phones and messaging apps so that information could move quickly. Alerts about suspicious vehicles or loitering thugs spread within seconds, and the network became a lifeline, uniting the community like never before. Mac watched it all quietly, leaning against the doorway of his garage as the neighborhood came alive with resilience. Neighbors who had once been too scared to speak out were finding their voices. People who rarely interacted now exchanged nods of solidarity as they passed each other on the street. Pride swelled in Mac's chest as he saw the seeds of defiance take root. Razor's gang was still out there, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like the neighborhood had taken back a sliver of its power. The resistance, however, didn't go unnoticed. One evening, Mac sat in his garage, organizing tools when Lisa burst in, her face flushed with urgency. "They're outside the broken tap," she said, barely catching her breath. "A whole group of them. They're trying to scare people away." Mac stood without a word, his expression hardening as he grabbed his jacket. He didn't need to ask for details. He already knew what he'd find. The tension in his steps mirrored the storm brewing inside him as he approached the bar. The scene outside the broken tap was exactly what he'd expected. Razor's crew loitered near the entrance, their numbers larger than usual. They leaned against parked cars, laughing and smoking loudly, their presence designed to intimidate. A few regular patrons lingered nearby, hesitating at the edge of the street, too nervous to enter. Mac didn't slow as he approached, his broad frame cutting through the night like a storm cloud. Razor spotted him first, and a smirk spread across his face. "Well, look who it is," he sneered, pushing off the car he was leaning on. "The neighborhood hero." Mac's voice was calm, but carried the weight of a man who had endured more than his share of battles. "You've made your point," he said, his gaze steady. "Now leave." Razor laughed, motioning lazily to his crew. "We're just having a little fun, big guy. You should lighten up." Mac took another step forward, his imposing presence forcing the nearest thug to shuffle back. His voice dropped, low and steady, but with a cutting edge. "This isn't a request. You're not welcome here. Go." For a moment, the crew hesitated, their bravado faltering as they exchanged uncertain glances. Razor held his ground, his smirk fading into a snarl. "This isn't over," he spat, motioning for his men to follow as he retreated into the night. Inside, the bar erupted into quiet cheers. The regulars, emboldened by Mac's unwavering stance, clapped him on the shoulder as he stepped in. Lisa patted his arm, her smile tired but genuine. "You're starting to make a habit of this," she teased. Mac's lips twitched into a faint grin, but his eyes remained serious. "It's not over yet." He glanced toward the door, his resolve hardening. "But they'll think twice before coming back here." The pushback from the community grew stronger. Diego's network expanded, with more people joining to share information. Mac and a few others began patrolling near businesses that had been targeted, standing guard to deter Razor's men. Word spread quickly. This neighborhood wasn't going to roll over. But the fight wasn't without setbacks. Razor's men retaliated by vandalizing the florist's delivery van and smashing windows at the corner store. Mac visited each site personally, reassuring the owners that they weren't alone. At the florist's shop, he helped clean up the mess, his quiet presence enough to bring some comfort. "They're getting desperate," Mac said to Lisa one night as they walked the block together. "They're trying to make an example out of anyone who resists, but it's not working," Lisa replied. "The more they push, the stronger everyone gets. They're not used to people standing up to them." Mac nodded, but his expression remained grim. He knew Razor's crew wasn't acting alone. Deacon's operation was still in the shadows, and until they exposed it, the neighborhood wouldn't be safe. The next evening, the community gathered again at the Broken Tap. This time, the mood was lighter, a cautious optimism replacing the fear that had once hung heavy. People shared stories of how they had stood their ground, their courage growing with every small victory. Mac stood at the edge of the room, watching as neighbors laughed and planned together. Lisa joined him, her smile warm. "Look at them," she said. "They're not just surviving anymore. They're fighting back." Mac crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "This is just the start. We've got their attention. Now we make sure they know we're not backing down." The days following the community's pushback brought a brief, uneasy calm. Razor's men seemed less visible, though their presence lingered like a shadow over the neighborhood. Mac knew it wasn't over. The quiet wasn't a retreat. It was a regrouping. One evening, Mac sat in his garage, poring over the reports Diego had compiled. Invoices, shipment manifests, and snippets of surveillance video painted a picture of Razor's activities, but the details didn't add up. Razor wasn't the kind to orchestrate something this large. He was too impulsive, too crude. Someone else was behind it, pulling the strings. Mac circled a location on the map, pinned to the wall. An old factory on the outskirts of the neighborhood. It had been abandoned for years, but recently, Razor's men had been seen there. Diego had flagged it as a potential hub based on suspicious vehicle activity. Unmarked trucks arriving late at night and leaving hours later. "This has to be it," Mac muttered to himself. "They're using it for something big." The next night, Mac parked his truck a few blocks away from the factory and approached on foot. The air was thick with tension as he crept along the overgrown fence line, careful to stay out of sight. From a distance, he could see the faint glow of lights filtering through the broken windows. Shadows moved inside, silhouetted against the flickering bulbs. Mac crouched behind a stack of rusted barrels, watching as a truck backed into the loading dock. Two men stood by the open bay doors, their postures alert. They weren't locals, clean-cut, with military-like precision in their movements. These weren't Razor's typical thugs. From his vantage point, Mac could hear snippets of their conversation, their voices carrying faintly through the still night. "Shipment's late again," one of the men said, his tone irritated. "The boss isn't going to like that." "It'll be here," the other replied. "It better. We've got to move everything by the end of the week." Mac's gut tightened. This wasn't just a small-time operation. Whatever they were moving, it was big enough to draw attention from higher up. He edged closer, careful not to make a sound. The next morning, Mac shared his findings with Lisa and Diego at the Broken Tap. Lisa leaned against the bar, her brow furrowed. "If this is as big as you think, why haven't we heard about it before?" "Because they're smart," Mac said. "Razor and his crew are the distraction. All the noise they make in the neighborhood keeps people from noticing what's happening in the shadows." Diego nodded, his fingers flying over his laptop. "The trucks Mac saw match the ones we flagged from the construction sites. They're routing everything through this factory." Lisa folded her arms. "So, what are they moving? Drugs? Stolen goods?" "I don't know yet," Mac admitted. "But whatever it is, it's important enough for them to guard it like this." That evening, Mac returned to the factory, this time with a small camera Diego had rigged up. His goal was to document the activity and gather enough proof to tie it back to Deacon. As he approached the building, the faint rumble of an engine reached his ears. He ducked behind a stack of pallets as another truck pulled in, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver stepped out, joined by two armed men. They opened the back of the truck, revealing stacks of large crates. Mac's fingers tightened around the camera as he zoomed in, capturing the scene. He couldn't see what was inside, but the way the men handled the crates, carefully, almost reverently, told him they were valuable. One of the men barked an order, and the others began unloading the crates. Mac shifted to get a better angle, his foot brushing against a loose piece of gravel. The small sound was almost imperceptible, but one of the guards turned sharply, his flashlight sweeping the area. Mac froze, pressing himself flat against the ground as the beam passed overhead. The guard lingered for a moment before turning back to the truck. Mac let out a slow breath, his heart pounding. The following day, Mac reconvened with Lisa and Diego, showing them the footage. Diego frowned, pausing on a frame that showed the side of one crate. "There's a marking here," he said, enlarging the image. "It's faint, but it looks like a serial number." Lisa leaned closer. "Can you trace it?" "Give me a few hours," Diego said, already typing. While Diego worked, Mac turned to Lisa. "This is bigger than Razor. These guys are professionals." Lisa nodded. "And if Deacon's behind it, he's using the neighborhood as a cover. All the chaos Razor creates keeps people distracted." Mac's jaw tightened. Not anymore. By evening, Diego had results. He met Mac and Lisa at the bar, his laptop open to a search result. The serial number matches a shipment registered under a shell company. It's tied to a distributor outside the city, one with connections to illegal arms trading. Mac's stomach sank. "Weapons!" Lisa's face paled. "They're moving weapons through the neighborhood?" Diego nodded. "It explains the heavy security and why they're so careful with the crates. This isn't just about scaring people out of their homes. They're using the neighborhood as a smuggling route." Mac leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. "We need to stop this, but we need more. Proof that ties it directly to Deacon." Lisa placed a hand on his arm. "We'll find it. But be careful, Mac. If they're moving weapons, they won't hesitate to use them." The neighborhood was quiet that night, but Mac knew better than to trust the stillness. He parked his truck a few blocks away from the old factory, his movements cautious as he approached on foot. The glow of security lights seeped through cracks in the weathered walls, and the faint hum of machinery carried through the air. This time, he wasn't alone. Diego sat in the truck, monitoring a hacked security feed on his laptop. Lisa had insisted on coming as backup, parked further down the block, ready to call for help if things went south. Mac adjusted the small earpiece Diego had rigged up, his voice low as he spoke into it. "I'm going in. Keep an eye on the cameras." "Copy that," Diego replied, his tone tense. "There's movement inside, but nothing outside for now." Mac crept along the fence line, his boots silent on the damp ground. He found an opening near the loading dock and slipped inside, keeping to the shadows. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil and metal, the faint clatter of crates and muffled voices echoing through the cavernous space. He crouched behind a stack of pallets, watching as a group of men unloaded crates from a truck parked near the center of the factory. Razor wasn't there, but the crew looked well organized, their movements efficient. These weren't street-level thugs. They were trained professionals. One of the men pried open a crate with a crowbar, and Mac's stomach tightened as he caught a glimpse of its contents. Rifles, neatly packed and gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Another crate was opened, revealing boxes of ammunition. "Diego," Mac whispered into the earpiece. "You seeing this?" "Yeah," Diego replied. "That's military grade. No way they got this through legal channels." Mac pulled out the small camera Diego had given him, snapping photos of the scene. He zoomed in on the serial numbers etched onto the weapons, capturing every detail. His mind raced. If Deacon was moving this level of firepower, it wasn't just a neighborhood problem. It was a ticking time bomb. The men began stacking the crates onto a forklift, preparing to move them deeper into the factory. Mac shifted positions, inching closer to get a better angle. He needed to see where they were taking the shipment. As he moved, his hand brushed against a loose piece of metal, sending it clattering to the floor. "Who's there?" one of the men barked, his voice sharp. Mac froze, pressing himself against the cold concrete wall. Footsteps echoed as one of the guards approached, a flashlight beam sweeping across the pallets. Mac's breath came slow and steady, his muscles tensed like a coiled spring. The guard stopped just short of Mac's hiding spot, muttering to himself before turning back. Mac exhaled silently, waiting until the man's footsteps faded before moving again. He couldn't afford another mistake. Diego's voice crackled in his ear. "There's a room at the back of the factory. Looks like they're storing the bulk of the shipment there. You've got 2 guards stationed outside." Mac navigated the dimly lit maze of crates and machinery, finally reaching the back of the factory. From his vantage point, he could see the room Diego had mentioned. The guards were armed and alert, their eyes scanning the space. "Got it," Mac whispered. "I'm going to get a closer look." "No way," Diego said. "You'll never make it past those guards." "I don't need to," Mac replied, spotting a narrow metal staircase leading to a catwalk above. He climbed carefully, the old structure groaning under his weight. From the catwalk, he had a clear view of the room's interior through a grimy window. Inside, more crates were stacked high, their markings matching the ones he'd seen earlier. But there was more. A table covered in blueprints and documents. Mac zoomed in with the camera, capturing the details. Maps of the city were spread out, with key locations circled in red. It wasn't just a smuggling operation, it was a distribution network. Mac's heart raced as he realized the scope of what he was seeing. Deacon wasn't just moving weapons, he was preparing to arm multiple crews across the city. The neighborhood was just the first step, a staging ground for something much larger. As he snapped the last photo, the crackle of a radio broke the silence below. One of the guards spoke into his radio, his tone urgent. "Boss, we've got movement near the loading dock." "Might be someone snooping around," Diego's voice came through Mac's earpiece. "Mac, they've spotted something. You need to get out of there. Now!" Mac descended the catwalk quickly but carefully, his movements deliberate. The factory had come alive with activity, the men moving with heightened urgency. Mac slipped back through the maze of crates, sticking to the shadows. He made it to the loading dock just as another truck pulled in, its engine rumbling. Mac ducked behind a stack of barrels, his breath steady despite the tension. The truck doors opened, revealing another load of crates. He took a final photo before slipping through the fence and into the night. Back at the broken tap, Mac spread the photos and notes across a table, Lisa and Diego leaning over them. "This isn't just about us," Mac said, his voice heavy. "They're gearing up for something big. If we don't stop this, The whole city could be at risk. Lisa's expression hardened. Then we need to hit them where it hurts. What's the next step? Mac looked at Diego. Can you map out the locations they're targeting? Diego nodded. It'll take some time, but I can cross-reference the maps with known activity zones. Lisa placed a hand on Mac's shoulder. The neighborhood's ready to help. We've been waiting for this fight. Mac's jaw tightened. Good. Because this is bigger than any of us. If we don't act now, it'll be too late. The discovery of the weapons shipment had shaken Mac, Lisa, and Diego to their cores. What had started as a fight for their neighborhood had grown into something far larger. Deacon's operation wasn't just a threat to them, it was a threat to the entire city. Mac knew they couldn't wait for the authorities to act. They had to take matters into their own hands. The Broken Tap became the unofficial headquarters for the neighborhood's resistance. The back room, once used for storage, was now filled with maps, photographs, and Diego's laptop, which hummed constantly as he tracked movement at the factory and shipping yard. Mac stood at the center of the room, addressing a growing group of locals. This isn't just about Razor's gang anymore, he began, his voice steady but commanding. Deacon's using our neighborhood as a front for a much larger operation. We've seen the weapons, and we know they're planning to move them soon. If we don't stop them now, the damage could spread far beyond our streets. Lisa nodded, stepping forward. We've been holding our ground against Razor's crew, and that's a start. But this is bigger. We need to disrupt their operation, make it impossible for them to move those shipments. Diego tapped the laptop, bringing up a map of the area. I've been monitoring the trucks. They're moving between the factory, the shipping yard, and a couple of smaller drop points. If we can block those routes or disable their vehicles, we can slow them down. Mac looked at the group, his eyes scanning the determined faces of his neighbors. This isn't going to be easy. They're organized, armed, and dangerous. But if we work together, we can make it impossible for them to operate here. Over the next few days, the neighborhood transformed into a hive of activity. Mac and Diego worked with a core group of locals to plan strategic disruptions. The florist, who had become a quiet but fierce ally, used her delivery routes to scout Razor's movements. The mechanic offered tools and equipment to disable vehicles. A group of younger residents, inspired by Mac's determination, volunteered to act as lookouts. Mac divided the group into teams, each with a specific role. One team would monitor the factory, tracking incoming and outgoing shipments. Another would focus on the shipping yard, gathering intel and preparing to intercept the next major delivery. A third team, led by Mac himself, would handle direct action, blocking routes, sabotaging vehicles, and creating distractions. One night, Mac and Lisa led a small group to one of the drop points Diego had flagged, a run-down warehouse near the edge of the neighborhood. They waited in the shadows as a truck pulled in, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Two men exited the cab, one holding a clipboard, the other a flashlight. Mac signaled to the group, and they moved silently into position. Using a set of bolt cutters provided by the mechanic, they cut the truck's brake lines and slashed its tires. By the time the men inside realized something was wrong, it was too late. The truck was immobilized, and the group had melted back into the shadows. The next morning, Razor's crew was scrambling to recover the shipment, their frustration evident as they argued loudly outside the warehouse. Mac watched from a distance, a grim satisfaction settling over him. The disruption had worked, but he knew it was only the beginning. As word spread of the community's efforts, more neighbors joined the cause. The diner owner, whose shop had been vandalized weeks earlier, began coordinating food and supplies for the volunteers. Mr. Nguyen, emboldened by Mac's leadership, started keeping a log of Razor's movements, noting which businesses they targeted and when. The florist reported seeing an increase in patrols near the factory. "They're on edge," she told Mac during a meeting at the Broken Tap. "They know something's up." "Good," Mac replied. "The more they're looking over their shoulders, the less they'll focus on moving those weapons." Diego's monitoring paid off when he intercepted a communication from Razor's crew about a major shipment scheduled to move through the shipping yard. "This is it," he told Mac, pointing to the screen. They're consolidating everything for one big delivery. If we hit them there, we can cripple the operation. Mac leaned over the map, his finger tracing the route from the factory to the yard. We'll need to hit them on both ends, block the trucks leaving the factory and disrupt the loading at the yard. If we can stop this shipment, we can shut them down. Lisa placed a hand on Mac's shoulder. The neighborhood's ready. They're tired of living in fear. Just tell us what to do. Mac nodded. We go all in. The next few days were spent preparing for the operation. Teams rehearsed their roles, practicing how to set up blockades and disable vehicles quickly. Diego coordinated communication, ensuring everyone could stay connected during the operation. Lisa worked with the volunteers to keep morale high, her fiery determination inspiring even the most hesitant neighbors. Mac met with Detective Parker one last time, bringing photos and notes as proof of Deacon's operation. Parker studied the evidence, his expression unreadable. You're walking a fine line, Simmons. You take this too far, and it won't just be Razor's crew coming after you. It'll be the law. Then do something, Max said, his voice firm. You've got everything you need to act. If you don't, we will. Parker sighed, leaning back in his chair. I'll see what I can do. But don't get yourself killed. The night of the operation was thick with tension, the kind that settled deep in the chest and lingered with every breath. Max stood in the back room of the broken tap, surrounded by his team of volunteers. The map of the shipping yard was spread across the table, with marked routes and positions sketched in red pen. This is it, Max said, his voice steady but intense. We've got one shot to stop this shipment. If we succeed, we cripple their operation. If we fail, he let the words hang in the air, the weight of the stakes settling over everyone. Lisa stepped forward, her arms crossed. We won't fail. The neighborhood's ready, Mac. We've got eyes on every route, and Diego's got their comms locked. They won't know what hit them. Diego nodded from behind his laptop, the screen glowing as he tracked the location of the trucks. The first one's leaving the factory now. 2 more are scheduled to follow. The yard's active, too. There's a lot of movement near the loading docks. Mac took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping the room. Stick to the plan. We disrupt the trucks first, then hit the yard. Stay sharp and stay safe. The shipping yard was a sprawling maze of stacked containers, floodlights cutting through the darkness like cold beacons. Razor's men were scattered throughout, patrolling with flashlights and radios clipped to their belts. The rumble of truck engines echoed through the air as the first vehicle backed into a loading bay. Mac and his team moved silently along the perimeter, their dark clothing blending into the shadows. Lisa and her group positioned themselves at the entrance to the yard, ready to create a diversion if needed. Diego stayed in the truck, feeding updates through their earpieces. First truck's almost loaded, Diego said, his voice low. Guards are thick near the bay. You'll need to draw them out. Copy that, Mac replied. He signaled to a few volunteers who slipped away to set up a distraction. Moments later, a loud bang echoed through the yard as a pile of barrels toppled over, the metal clanging like a thunderstorm. The guards near the bay turned sharply, their flashlights darting toward the noise. "What the hell was that?" one of them barked. "Go check it out," another ordered. As the guards moved toward the commotion, Mac and his group slipped closer to the truck. Using tools provided by the mechanic, they quickly slashed the tires and cut the fuel lines. The truck sputtered as its engine died, the driver cursing loudly. "They've disabled the truck," one of the guards shouted into his radio. "Good." Diego's voice came through Mac's earpiece. "That'll buy us some time. The second truck's on its way." Meanwhile, Lisa's team at the entrance sprang into action. As the second truck approached, they rolled a makeshift barricade, a line of old barrels and crates, into the road. The truck screeched to a halt, its driver honking angrily. Razor's men jumped out, only to be met with a barrage of noise as Lisa's group set off air horns and banged on metal pipes. The confusion was enough to stall the truck, giving another team time to disable it. Razor's men fired into the air, shouting threats, but the community members scattered, disappearing into the shadows like ghosts. Back at the yard, the remaining guards were growing agitated. "We've got interference on all sides," one of them yelled into his radio. "Get Razor down here now." Mac took advantage of the chaos, leading his team toward the main loading bay. They found the last truck being loaded with crates, the contents hidden beneath heavy tarps. Mac motioned for his team to hold back as he moved closer, snapping photos of the scene with Diego's camera. As he got closer, Razor appeared, his face twisted with rage. "Who the hell is messing with my operation?" he shouted, storming toward the loading bay. Mac stepped out of the shadows, his voice calm but cold. "That would be me." Razor froze for a moment, then laughed, though the sound was hollow. "You just don't know when to quit, do you, old man?" "I know enough to see you're out of your depth," Mac replied. "This isn't your game, Razor. You're just a pawn, and it's time you learned your place." Razor's men began closing in, but the sound of approaching sirens cut through the air. Diego's voice came through Mac's earpiece. "The police are on their way." Parker must have finally pulled the trigger. Razor sneered. "You think the cops scare me? You're just buying time." "No," Mac said, his voice steady. "I'm ending this." In a swift move, Mac lunged toward the truck, yanking the tarp off one of the crates. The weapons gleamed under the floodlights, the sight freezing Razor's men in their tracks. "This is what you're protecting?" Mac said, his voice rising. "This is what you're bringing into our neighborhood?" The sirens grew louder, and Razor's bravado crumbled. "You're going to regret this, Simmons," he spat, backing away. As the police vehicles rolled into the yard, Detective Parker stepped out, his gun drawn. "Hands in the air! Now!" Razor's men hesitated, but the sight of the officers swarming the yard left them no choice. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Razor glared at Mac one last time before turning to run, only to be tackled by Parker. Mac watched as the police began securing the scene, the tension in his chest finally easing. Lisa approached, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. "We did it," she said softly. Mac nodded, his gaze fixed on the chaos around them. This was just the start. Deacon's still out there. The next morning, Mac stood on the edge of the neighborhood, staring at the downtown skyline where Deacon's empire loomed. The victory at the shipping yard had bought them time, but it wasn't enough. Deacon's reach extended far beyond Razor's crew, and Mac knew confronting him wouldn't be as simple as showing up with accusations. Mac met with Lisa and Diego at the Broken Tap to strategize. Diego had dug deeper into Deacon's dealings, uncovering a web of shell companies, fake invoices, and payouts that painted a clear picture of corruption. "This guy's been running a smuggling operation for years," Diego said, scrolling through files on his laptop. "Weapons, drugs, even counterfeit goods. Razor's crew is just the latest layer of muscle." Lisa frowned, leaning over the table. "We've got evidence, but it's still circumstantial. Deacon's lawyers will eat this alive in court." "We don't need a trial," Mac said. "Not yet. We need to corner him, make him show his hand." Diego nodded. "I intercepted some chatter from Razor's men before the raid. Deacon's been holding meetings at his private club downtown. If we can find out what he's planning next, we'll have something concrete." Lisa crossed her arms. "And how do we get into his club? They're not exactly going to let us walk in." Mac's jaw tightened. "We make them let us in." Later that evening, Mac and Lisa drove into the city, their destination a lavish, members-only club nestled in the heart of downtown. The entrance was guarded by two men in sharp suits, their eyes scanning everyone who approached. Lisa adjusted her jacket, her nerves barely hidden beneath her steady exterior. "You sure about this?" she asked as they stepped out of the car. "Not really," Mac admitted, "but we don't have a choice." They approached the entrance, the guards stepping forward to block their path. "Members only," one of them said, his tone clipped. "We're here to see Deacon," Mac replied, his voice firm. "Tell him Marcus Simmons is here. He'll want to hear what I have to say." The guards exchanged a glance, one of them pulling out a phone. After a tense minute, he nodded. "You've got 5 minutes. Don't make us regret this." Inside, the club was a display of opulence, crystal chandeliers, leather armchairs, and a hum of quiet conversation. Deacon sat at a table near the back, sipping whiskey and surrounded by men in tailored suits. He looked up as Mac and Lisa approached, his expression turning to mild amusement. "Marcus Simmons," Deacon said, his voice smooth. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Mac didn't sit, his gaze steady on Deacon. "We need to talk." Deacon gestured to the empty seats across from him. "By all means. Let's talk." Lisa sat reluctantly, her posture rigid. Mac remained standing. "Your operation is falling apart," he said bluntly. "Razor's crew is in custody. We shut down your shipments at the yard. It's over." Deacon chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, Marcus, you're as predictable as ever. Do you really think a few minor disruptions are enough to stop me? I've been in this business longer than you've been fixing cars." "It's not just me," Max said, his voice low but firm. "The neighborhood's standing up. We've got evidence, enough to bring the cops, the press, and the entire city down on you." Deacon's smile faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered. "Evidence?" he asked, swirling his drink. "And what, pray tell, do you think you've uncovered? A few documents? Some rumors? My lawyers will laugh you out of court." Lisa leaned forward, her voice sharp. "We have more than you think. Serial numbers on weapons, intercepted communications, records of your shipments. You're sloppy, Deacon, and it's going to cost you." Deacon's jaw tightened, his arrogance slipping for a moment before he regained control. "You've made your point," he said, his tone icy. "But if you think you're walking out of here with any leverage, you're mistaken." As he spoke, two of Deacon's men moved closer, their presence looming. Mac tensed, his fists clenching, but he didn't back down. "You can't intimidate me, Deacon. This isn't a fight you can win with muscle." Deacon leaned forward, his voice low. "No, but I can outlast you. You think your little crusade will scare me? You're a gnat trying to stop a hurricane." Mac's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe, but hurricanes have a way of ripping apart everything in their path. And I'll keep coming until there's nothing left of you." Deacon leaned back, his smirk returning. "Enjoy your moral high ground while it lasts, Mr. Simmons. Because when you fall, no one will be there to catch you." The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but Mac had achieved his goal. Deacon was rattled. As they left the club, Lisa exhaled sharply. "That could have gone a lot worse." "It's not over yet," Mac said. "He's going to escalate." "We need to be ready," Lisa nodded. "What's the next move?" Mac's jaw tightened. "We keep digging. If he thinks he can outlast us, we'll prove him wrong." The days after the tense meeting with Deacon were a whirlwind of activity. Mac knew the confrontation at the club had left an impression. Deacon wasn't invincible, and for the first time cracks were showing in his carefully constructed facade. But Mac also knew that Deacon wouldn't take the challenge lying down. At the broken tap, Diego reviewed the files they had collected, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We've got enough to hurt him," he said, his voice steady but cautious. "But not enough to finish him. He's too well insulated." Lisa sighed, leaning against the bar. "What more do we need? We've tied him to the weapons shipments, the smuggling routes, and Razor's crew. It's not just about what we know," Max said. "It's about what we can prove, and what the public will believe." Diego paused, his brow furrowing as he studied the screen. "There's one more angle we haven't explored. The financial trail. If we can tie his money directly to the smuggling operation, it's game over." Lisa frowned. "How do we do that?" "He's got layers of shell companies." "Not all layers are perfect," Diego said, a spark of determination in his voice. "People make mistakes. If we find even one slip-up, it's enough to pull the whole thing apart." That evening, Mac, Lisa, and Diego worked late into the night, sifting through the mountain of data they had accumulated. At first, it seemed like a dead end. Deacon's network was extensive and deliberately opaque. But then Diego froze, his eyes narrowing at a line in a ledger. "Here," he said, pointing to the screen. "A payment from one of Deacon's shell companies to a freight forwarding service. It's listed as construction supplies, but the timing matches the weapons shipments." Mac leaned over the laptop. "Can you link it to the shipments we intercepted?" Diego nodded, his fingers flying over the keys. "Give me a minute." As the pieces fell into place, the tension in the room thickened. Diego pulled up a final document, a delivery manifest with Deacon's signature, buried among dozens of others. "This is it," he said, his voice triumphant. A direct connection. He signed off on the shipments himself. Lisa straightened, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. This is what we needed. Mac's face remained serious. It's a start, but it won't mean anything if we don't act on it. The next morning, Mac met with Detective Parker at the precinct. Parker studied the documents, his expression unreadable. "You're sure about this?" he asked, looking up at Mac. "Dead sure," Mac replied. "This is the link you've been waiting for. It ties him directly to the smuggling operation." Parker sighed, leaning back in his chair. "This isn't going to be easy. Deacon's got influence, and he won't go down without a fight." "He's already fighting," Mac said. "But he's not untouchable. Not anymore." After a moment of silence, Parker nodded. "I'll get a warrant, but you need to be ready. This could get ugly." As the police prepared to move on Deacon, Mac returned to the neighborhood to warn the community. Razor's crew might have been neutralized, but Deacon still had resources, and retaliation was a real threat. At a meeting in the Broken Tap, Mac addressed the gathered crowd. "We've got what we need to take Deacon down," he said. "But we're not out of the woods yet. He knows we're coming, and he'll try to make us pay for it." "What do we do?" asked Mr. Nguyen, his voice trembling slightly. "Stay vigilant," Mac said. "Keep an eye on your neighbors, your businesses. If you see anything suspicious, let us know immediately. We're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for the future of this neighborhood." The room fell silent as the weight of Mac's words settled over the group. Lisa stepped forward, her voice steady. "We've come this far together. We can see this through, but we have to stick together." The night air was heavy with tension as Mac stood on the edge of the shipping yard, the faint hum of activity within carrying across the stillness. The yard was alight with motion, trucks idling, crates being loaded, and guards patrolling with weapons slung across their shoulders. This was it. Deacon had consolidated his remaining assets here, betting on one final shipment to keep his operation afloat. Behind Mac, Lisa, Diego, and a handful of community volunteers gathered, their faces a mix of fear and determination. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Disrupt the shipment, expose the weapons to law enforcement, and force Deacon's hand. Diego's voice crackled in Mac's earpiece. "The cops are en route, but it'll take them at least 15 minutes to get here. We've got to hold the line until they arrive." Mac turned to the group. "Stay sharp and stick to the plan. We're not here to fight. We're here to stop them from leaving. If things go south, fall back. No one's life is worth more than this." Lisa touched his arm, her voice low. "You ready?" Mac's jaw tightened. "I've been ready for this my whole life." The group moved into position, sticking to the shadows as they spread out around the yard. Diego monitored the guards' movements from a nearby vantage point, guiding Mac and the others through the maze of containers. Lisa's team set up barricades near the entrance, using old barrels and debris to block the truck's exit routes. As the first truck began to pull out, Mac stepped into its path, his broad frame illuminated by the floodlights. The driver slammed on the brakes, shouting for the guards. Mac didn't flinch as two armed men approached, their rifles raised. "Step aside!" one of them barked. "Not happening," Mac replied, his voice calm but unyielding. Before the guards could react, Lisa and her team appeared, banging metal pipes and shouting to create a diversion. The noise drew the attention of more guards, who rushed toward the commotion, leaving the loading area exposed. Mac used the opening to move toward the truck, yanking open the back doors. Inside, crates of weapons gleamed under the harsh light. He turned back to the guards, his voice ringing out. "This is what you're protecting? Guns that'll tear apart our streets?" The guards hesitated, their confidence faltering. One of them raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Mac lunged, knocking the weapon aside and disarming him with practiced efficiency. The second guard turned to run, shouting for reinforcements. The scene descended into chaos as more trucks tried to leave, only to find their paths blocked by Lisa's barricades. Volunteers armed with flashlights and air horns created confusion, scattering the guards and buying precious time. Mac climbed onto one of the trucks, shouting directions to keep his team coordinated. Deacon arrived minutes later, stepping out of a sleek black SUV with a look of pure rage. Flanked by two of his enforcers, he surveyed the scene, his calm arrogance replaced by frustration. "Shut this down!" he barked. "I don't care how! Just do it!" Mac spotted him immediately, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This ends tonight, Deacon." Deacon turned, his expression darkening as he saw Mac standing defiantly atop the truck. "You just don't know when to quit, do you?" he sneered, stepping forward. "This isn't your fight, Simmons. Walk away while you still can." "This is my fight," Mac shot back. "It's always been my fight. People like you think you can buy and bully your way through the world. But not here. Not anymore. This is over, Deacon. Call off your men and face the consequences." Deacon let out a harsh laugh, his composure cracking. "Consequences? You think you've won? I've been in this game longer than you've been breathing. I don't lose." Mac stepped closer, his voice steady but cutting. "You already have. The cops are on their way. Your crew's falling apart, and we've got enough evidence to bury you. It's done." Deacon's eyes darted to the scattered remnants of his operation. Guards shouted conflicting orders, trucks revved but couldn't move past the barricades, and Lisa's group continued their disruption efforts. He clenched his fists, his usual smug confidence replaced by desperation. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," Deacon snarled. "I've crushed men like you without lifting a finger." Mac stopped a few feet from him, his broad frame towering over Deacon's wiry build. "I've dealt with men like you my whole life," Mac said, his voice low but firm. "You hide behind money, power, and people willing to do your dirty work. But you're nothing without them." Deacon's face twisted in anger as he lunged forward, but Mac caught him easily, twisting his arm behind his back. "You're not going anywhere," Mac growled, his voice like steel. Deacon struggled, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "Get off me, Simmons! You have no idea who I am. I know exactly who you are," Mac replied, dragging him toward the center of the yard. "You're a parasite, feeding off the pain of others. And tonight, you answer for it." The wail of sirens grew louder, and police vehicles swarmed into the yard, their lights slicing through the chaos. Officers poured out, shouting orders as they quickly subdued Deacon's remaining guards. Trucks were immobilized, weapons seized, and the remaining crew members cuffed and led away. Detective Parker stepped out of his car, his gun drawn as he approached the scene. His gaze landed on Deacon, who was still struggling in Mac's grip. "Charles Deacon," Parker said, his voice cold and commanding. "You're under arrest for arms trafficking, conspiracy, and a whole list of other charges. You're done." Deacon's face turned red with fury. "This is a mistake. Do you know who I am? I'll have your badge for this." Parker smirked, lowering his gun as officers moved in to cuff Deacon. "Yeah, you've mentioned that before. Let's see how far that gets you in prison." Deacon's eyes darted wildly as he was restrained, finally locking onto Mac. His voice was venomous as he spat. "This isn't over, Simmons. You think you've won? You can't stop people like me. There will always be another Deacon." Mac's gaze was steady, unwavering. "Maybe. But I can stop you, and that's enough for tonight." Deacon was dragged toward a waiting patrol car, shouting threats that dissolved into the noise of the scene. Mac stood still for a moment, watching as the man who had tormented his neighborhood was finally taken away. The weight of weeks of tension, fear, and determination began to settle on him. Parker approached, his expression softer than usual. "You did good, Simmons," he said. "This wouldn't have happened without you." Mac shook his head. "It wasn't just me. The neighborhood stood up. We stood together." Parker nodded, glancing around the yard where officers continued their work. "Well, they'll have a hell of a story to tell tomorrow." Mac's lips quirked into a faint smile. "Let's hope it's one they don't have to repeat." As the police wrapped up the scene, Mac walked back toward Lisa and Diego, who were standing near the barricades with the rest of the volunteers. Lisa smiled at him, exhaustion evident in her face, but pride shining in her eyes. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," Mac corrected, his voice firm but kind. "And now we rebuild." The morning after the confrontation at the shipping yard, the neighborhood was quiet. The usual buzz of life had returned. A shopkeeper sweeping the sidewalk, kids chasing a ball down the street, and the distant sound of a train rumbling by. It was ordinary, almost serene, but beneath the calm, the air felt different, lighter, hopeful. Mac sat on the steps outside his garage, a mug of coffee in his hand. He stared out at the street, watching as people passed by with tentative smiles, their steps a little less hurried. Razor was gone, and so was Deacon. The weapons had been seized, the smuggling operation dismantled. The neighborhood had held its ground, and won. But Mac's thoughts were far from celebratory. Lisa arrived mid-morning, carrying a box of pastries from the diner. She sat down beside Mac, offering him one without a word. He took it with a small nod of thanks. "They're talking about you," she said after a moment, breaking the silence. "The neighborhood. They're calling you a hero." Mac exhaled, shaking his head. "I'm no hero, Lisa. Just a guy trying to keep his corner of the world from falling apart." Lisa smiled faintly. "Well, you did more than that. You gave people hope. You showed them they didn't have to be afraid anymore." Mac's gaze dropped to the ground, his voice quieter. "I've been afraid before. I know what it feels like." His mind drifted back to his younger years, to the days when the world seemed eager to remind him of where he didn't belong. The whispers when he walked into a room, the doors that were closed before he could even knock, the constant struggle to prove he was worth more than the color of his skin or the size of his fists. The scars he carried weren't just from the fights in the ring. They were from a lifetime of being underestimated, dismissed, and pushed aside. "This fight wasn't just about Deacon," Mac said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "It was about showing them, showing all of us, that we deserve better, that we belong here, no matter what anyone says." Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch grounding him. "And you did that, Mac. You gave this neighborhood a reason to stand up for itself." As the day went on, Mac found himself walking the streets, taking in the subtle changes. The florist's shop had replaced its shattered windows with a bright display of flowers. Mr. Nguyen stood outside his store, chatting with a customer without glancing nervously over his shoulder. The diner bustled with laughter and conversation, the fear that had once gripped the neighborhood now replaced with cautious optimism. Mac stopped by the corner where Razor's crew used to gather. The graffiti had been scrubbed away, the pavement clean. A group of kids played nearby, their laughter ringing out like music. He watched them for a moment, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. That evening, the neighborhood gathered at the Broken Tap for an impromptu meeting. The back room was crowded, the air buzzing with energy. People shared stories of their small victories, their relief at finally feeling safe again. Mac stood at the edge of the room, watching as the community came together. For so long, he had seen himself as an outsider, a man trying to fix what was broken without truly believing he could belong. But here, surrounded by people who had fought alongside him, he realized something had changed. Lisa nudged him forward, her voice teasing. "Go on, champ. They're waiting for you." Mac stepped to the center of the room, the chatter quieting as all eyes turned to him. He hesitated for a moment, searching for the right words. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, his voice steady but rough around the edges. "But I just want to say thank you. Not for me, but for each other. For standing up when it mattered. For not giving in." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "This neighborhood isn't just a place. It's people. People who fight for what's right, even when it's hard. And you all showed me that. You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That strength isn't just about muscles or fists. It's about standing together, even when the odds are stacked against you." The room erupted into applause, but Mac raised a hand, silencing them gently. "There's still work to do. Deacon might be gone, but there's always someone else waiting to take his place. We have to keep fighting. Not with violence, but with resolve. With community." As the meeting broke up and people began to filter out, Mac stayed behind, staring at the map pinned to the wall. Lisa approached, her voice soft. "What's next for you?" Mac shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know, but I think I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." Lisa smiled, her voice teasing. The neighborhood protector? Mac chuckled. Something like that. For Mac, the journey isn't over. He's found his place not just as a protector, but as a leader. The neighborhood will need him in the days ahead, as they rebuild and stand guard against those who would exploit them again. Lisa will continue her fight as a voice for the people, and Diego's skills will keep the community connected and informed. Together, they've built something stronger than they ever imagined. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.